Terror of Mechagodzilla grew out of a 1974 contest that Toho held for a sequel to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Yukiko Takayama, a student at a Toho-sponsored screenwriting school, won the contest and was invited by producer Tomoyuki Tanaka to develop her plot into a script. Takayama later recalled that Tanaka had encouraged her to write a story that she personally wanted to tell, which led her to center the story on a female protagonist and a tragic cyborg theme. Her draft was submitted July 1st, 1974, and underwent multiple rewrites by October and again in December, before filming began in 1974. Early drafts included 2 dinosaur monsters that could merge into one beast, but budget cuts eliminated one monster, meaning they could only have one new monster, and this became Titanosaurus. Directing duties had initially been offered to Jun Fukuda, who declined, and even rumored to Yoshimitsu Banno, but Tanaka ultimately pursued co-creator Ishirō Honda to return behind the camera. This was Honda's first Godzilla film since 1969's Godzilla's Revenge, and he later said that he enjoyed working with Takayama, valuing a woman's perspective as fresh for the series. Honda presided over the production with a small but very experienced crew, like assistant director Kensho Yamashita, who would later direct Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. Akira Ifukube returned to score Terror of Mechagodzilla. It was his first Godzilla score since 1968's Destroy All Monsters. Ifukube reinstated the original Godzilla March theme, and added a new dark motif for Mechagodzilla and Titanosaurus. The latter had piercing, high-pitched tones to distinguish it from Godzilla. Also, do I even need to talk about that roar from Titanosaurus? It is so memorable, it is so annoying, I love it. The monster suits were operated by Toru Kawai as Godzilla, Kazunari Mori as Mechagodzilla 2, and Tatsumi Nikamoto as Titanosaurus. Nikamoto actually wore the Titanosaurus suit backwards in some scenes to give it the impression that the monster was moving unnaturally compared to the other kaiju that were previously shown on screen in the franchise. Budget pressures of the mid-70s era were keenly felt. The prior film, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, had a bigger budget, but it still wasn't the huge financial hit that Toho was expecting. As a result, Terror of Mechagodzilla was given a much smaller budget. Special effects director Teruyushi Nakano noted that the film was treated as the last Godzilla movie, and this allowed them to experiment and basically do whatever the hell they wanted. You see, by the mid-1970s, the kaiju boom in Japan had largely collapsed. The 60s and early 70s had seen Godzilla as a cultural icon, but television's rise hollowed out cinema audiences. Film budgets were slashed and studios cut permanent contracts to stay afloat. Toho itself invested more into TV and aimed its remaining films at children, mainly at the Toho Children's Champion Festival. But in this environment, Terror of Mechagodzilla was a deliberate pivot. Yes, this started with Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, as that film was really serious as well, but here, Tanaka and Honda envisioned it as a return to a more serious style while still delivering on monster thrills. Nowadays, there's been a lot of talk about superhero fatigue in regards to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and even the new James Gunn DC universe, which hasn't even started yet, but who knows what'll happen with that. This is where audiences, general audiences, feel fatigued by the constant output of superhero movies in theaters. In 1975 in Japan, there was a very real kaiju fatigue. In the span of just 5 years, Japanese cinemas were bombarded with titles like Space Amoeba, Gamera vs. Zigra, Godzilla vs. Hedorah, Godzilla vs. Gigan, Daigoro vs. Goliath, Godzilla vs. Megalon, Submersion of Japan, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and Prophecies of Nostradamus. Those are just movies by Daiei and Toho. I didn't even talk about some of the other lesser-known movies by other film companies from around that time who were making them just to ape off of Godzilla and Gamera. Burnout was bound to happen, and it very much did. Terror of Mechagodzilla earned mixed reviews in Japan, and it was a flop at the box office, making it the poorest performing Godzilla film of the Showa era. Toho just didn't see any reason to continue the franchise after this point. With dwindling returns and internal anxiety, the studio quietly shelved any and all Godzilla productions after 1975, ending the Showa era's run and even the franchise as a whole for nearly a decade. However, the initial negative reaction towards Terror of Mechagodzilla, to me, is completely baffling. Nowadays, the film has been reevaluated by fans and critics in a much more positive light. I am by no means breaking new ground here in saying that Terror of Mechagodzilla is one of the best entries in the entire franchise. As a kid, I loved it for its kaiju action. As an adult, I love it for its thematic depth and writing. This film is a tragedy in the same vein as a story like Romeo and Juliet, or to keep it wrangled in with another kaiju Toho flick, War of the Gargantuas. This film served as the swan song for the Showa era, and it's safe to say that this era ended on a high note. So without wasting any more time, this is Terror of Mechagodzilla. Just a year after Godzilla's clash with Mechagodzilla, a submarine searching for its remains is attacked and destroyed by a mysterious underwater dinosaur, Titanosaurus. Interpol investigates and uncovers a disgraced scientist, Dr. Mafune, who once claimed to control the creature. Though presumed dead, Mafune is alive and working with the Black Hole Planet 3 aliens to unleash both Titanosaurus and a rebuilt Mechagodzilla on Tokyo. Mafune's daughter, Katsura, secretly aids them, having been forcefully turned into a cyborg years ago. As the monsters devastate the city, Godzilla arrives to stop them but is overwhelmed. Interpol manages to weaken Titanosaurus with sonic waves, and Godzilla battles Mechagodzilla yet again. Meanwhile, Katsura, realizing she's the key to controlling Mechagodzilla, sacrifices herself to stop the rampage. With Katsura gone, Mechagodzilla malfunctions, giving Godzilla the chance to destroy it. The invasion is thwarted, but the cost is heavy, leaving behind a trail of death, destruction, and personal tragedy as Godzilla wades off into the ocean, presumably for the final time. Out of all the films in the Showa era, Terror of Mechagodzilla feels like the one most interested in people. Not just as collateral damage in a kaiju brawl, but as fragile, conflicted, and compromised beings just trying to survive something much bigger than themselves. There's plenty of monster action, but what sticks is the story happening underneath. A woman losing her autonomy. A man consumed by professional shame, and a world that keeps treating technology as a shortcut to power. Katsura Mafune is at the center of all of this, a character who carries the film's emotional weight, and ultimately breaks under it. Through her, Terror of Mechagodzilla becomes a story about control in all of its forms, technological, patriarchal, and personal. At first glance, it's easy to think the central conflict is just Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, but the real fight is between Katsura and everything that's been done to her. She's a cyborg, but not by choice, but because her father and a bunch of aliens decided that she was more useful that way. Her body is still technically human, but her agency is gone, overwritten by other people's motives. Where Godzilla is this raw instinctive force, Mechagodzilla is remote controlled, mechanized brutality. Katsura ends up stuck between those two extremes, not fully one or the other. That limbo becomes the heart of the film. When Godzilla finally wins, you don't get this triumphant feeling, but it's more like the system that trapped Katsura finally just runs out of power. A lot of that system is built by her father, Dr. Shinzo Mafune, who might be one of the more pitiful villains in the entire franchise. He's not some mastermind trying to rule the world. He's just a sad, bitter old man who never got over being laughed out of the scientific community. The aliens don't even have to try that hard to recruit him. They just hand him a platform and a way to prove everyone wrong, and because his ego is louder than his empathy, he sacrifices Katsura in the process. It isn't framed, though, as cruelty, but something much worse. Self-righteousness. He believes that he's saving her by making her useful, which mirrors how science gets twisted in the film. Not to understand or improve anything, but to win some kind of grudge match with the rest of humanity. After a horrific accident, Mafune turns his daughter into a tool so that he can feel relevant again, instead of just letting her rest. Katsura's story ends up feeling a lot more layered than you would expect from a 70s monster movie, and that's probably not an accident. This is the only Godzilla film to ever be written by a woman, and her script gives Katsura a complexity that's rare in the genre. Katsura isn't just there to be rescued or to fall in love. She's torn between what other people want from her and whatever scraps of identity she's trying to hang on to. Her relationship with the male lead feels secondary to her internal conflict, which is about autonomy more than anything else. A lot of the film's sci-fi imagery with the cyborg tech, the alien implants, and the mind control signals work better as metaphor than as plot. It's not interested in how this stuff works scientifically. It's not about lore. It's not about how, isn't this like the great continuity of the Showa era? Isn't this how we eventually get to destroy all monsters? Like, it's not concerned with any of that, and I'm so happy it isn't. It's more about how easily people become objects when power gets centralized. Katsura is literally wired into Mechagodzilla's control system. She's also a stand-in for what happens when people are stripped of choice. She isn't given space to heal or recover or even get angry. The only way out is to completely remove herself from the system, which she does. The horror in this film doesn't really come from the kaiju. The alien, despite being cartoonishly evil, represents something eerily familiar. A structure that exploits people who've been pushed to the margins. They find Mafune because he's bitter and alone. They use Katsura because she's already been dehumanized. The invasion that happens on screen isn't loud or dramatic, but instead, we see most of the action in labs and backrooms, in places where consent is a technicality. And even though there are monsters stomping around, the scariest part of the movie, at least to me, is how easy it is to convince people to surrender their empathy in exchange for relevance, revenge, or just a sense of control. Not control, just a sense of it, a feeling. Like, oh, maybe I'll have a little bit of control. The image of a woman transforming into a machine forced to serve a system that neither sees nor values her humanity did not start with Terror of Mechagodzilla. Long before Katsura Mafune was being rewired by aliens and her father, Fritz Lang's Metropolis gave us Maria, a spiritual leader duplicated, hollowed out, and used to manipulate a city into chaos. There's more to this comparison than just the aesthetic. These two characters, separated by nearly 50 years of cinema, both reflect how science fiction repeatedly returns to a specific fear. That women, more than any other figures in these stories, will be the first to lose their agency when power and technology intersect. It's a fear that plays out quietly in Terror of Mechagodzilla, but it's deeply rooted in a genre that has always used androids, cyborgs, and replicants as metaphors for the loss of autonomy in the face of systemic control. In both films, the transformation into a machine is a violation, not an upgrade, not empowerment, but a theft. Maria's robot double is created by a male scientist and immediately weaponized. Her likeness is exploited to incite violence and to turn the working class against itself, which conveniently benefits the elite. Maria's voice, image, and influence are all repurposed, stripped of context, and used to manufacture consent for chaos. Katsura's story hits many of the same beats. Rebuilt by her father after a fatal accident, then surgically modified to act as the control system for Mechagodzilla, she becomes the centerpiece of a war that she never agreed to fight. Both women are forcibly repurposed, not just physically but narratively, cast into roles meant to serve patriarchal systems of control, and what's terrifying isn't just what they become, but how little they're allowed to object. What makes the parallel even more interesting is how both women are associated with passivity in their original form, and violence only arrives when men take control of their bodies. Maria in her human form is a peaceful figure, a voice of faith, unity, and compassion. The robot Maria is overtly sexualized, incendiary, and cruel. Likewise, Katsura is quiet, reserved, and emotionally closed off. The result of trauma, yes, but also of a lifetime spent under other people's influence. When the aliens take full control, her stoicism becomes mechanical. In both films, emotion and humanity are framed as threats to the system, and the solution is to just erase them. The context of who and why they're built also adds another layer. In Metropolis, the inventor creates the machine out of grief and obsession, modeling it after his lost love, Hell. It's less about scientific discovery and more about replacing a woman with a controllable version of herself. Dr. Mafune isn't much different. He rebuilds his daughter not to save her, but to use her as a vessel for revenge. Maybe deep down inside, there's some inkling of like, oh, I love my daughter and I want her to stay alive, but like that survival of Katsura is secondary to her function. The tragedy of Katsura isn't that she's a cyborg, It's that no one ever asked her if she wanted to be. Her mind is overwritten to serve a plan that benefits neither her nor the world that she lives in. Like Maria, she's not supposed to have opinions. She's supposed to behave, and behavior, in both cases, becomes performative. The robotic Maria is overtly seductive and theatrical, a parody of human emotion designed to provoke. Katsura, by contrast, is emotionless, to the point of repression, but that blankness is a performance too, required by the mechanical role that she's been assigned. The moment she starts to feel, when she falls in love, when she hesitates, the whole system begins to break down. What Terror of Mechagodzilla does well is show how fragile that system really is. It can only function as long as Katsura stays dehumanized. The second she begins to assert even a hint of will, the whole machine becomes unstable. She doesn't destroy Mechagodzilla by fighting it, but just by taking herself out, and that's enough to collapse the structure that enslaved her. Where Metropolis ends with reconciliation and unity, Terror of Mechagodzilla ends with silence and death. That difference really matters. Fritz Lang still believed in the heart mediating between the hand and the head. Honda, by contrast, leaves Katsura's body lifeless on a hillside while the camera quietly pulls away. You don't see a utopia coming. There's no awakening, no embracing of two opposing sides. It's just an aftermath of death, and that's it. Both women were treated as technology. Both tried in their final moments to reclaim something human, and both films suggest that once a person has been reduced to a function, the only escape might be to shut the system off entirely, even if it means going with it. Now let's sort of take this idea of analyzing Katsura as a tragic figure and bring Titanosaurus into the mix. Because Titanosaurus is a monster that has never gotten the credit she deserves. In fact, she's not a monster. She's a dinosaur. She never meant to cause any harm. As the final new kaiju of the Showa era, she's often overshadowed by Mechagodzilla's return, or Godzilla's final stand, but her role in Terror of Mechagodzilla is quietly heartbreaking. I mentioned this at the start of the video. That roar. Right? Everyone talks about Titanosaurus' roar. They find it annoying. They say it sounds like a trumpet.
For a decent-looking monster, he sure has an annoying cackle.
To me, as great as that roar sounds, doesn't it kind of sound like a cry for help? While Mechagodzilla is built for war, Titanosaurus is not. She's a peaceful aquatic dinosaur, docile by nature and controlled against her will. When seen through that lens, and especially when factoring in early drafts that refer to her as female, Titanosaurus becomes a perfect mirror to Katsura Mafune. Both are beings who were meant to exist peacefully but are repurposed into weapons through manipulation and control. Neither of them really choose to fight, but they're forced to. In many ways, Titanosaurus is the monster version of Katsura's arc, a gentle figure being mutilated and commanded by outside forces, stripped of her agency and forced into acts of destruction that she doesn't understand. Dr. Mafune treats Titanosaurus the same way he treats his daughter, as property. His obsession with revenge overrides any consideration for their well-being. He uses Katsura as an extension of his will, and he does the same to Titanosaurus, telepathically controlling her through a brainwave modulator and also using sonic frequencies and all this sci-fi bullshit that really doesn't make any sense, but who cares? The theme of unwilling destruction isn't really unique to this film and the Godzilla franchise, but Terror of Mechagodzilla carries it with a distinct sense of melancholy. We've seen moments where Jet Jaguar is mind-controlled by the Seatopians in order to do their bidding, and that's very, shallowly executed. We get a little bit of it. He doesn't really destroy any buildings. He just sort of flies through the air, and that's about it. In this film, though, we really get to see that in the deepest sense possible. Before Titanosaurus is ever mind-controlled, she's introduced as a rare and remarkable discovery, a living fossil who only attacks when provoked. Her initial scuffle with the research submarine is defensive, not aggressive. And yet, once Dr. Mafune partners with the Black Hole Planet 3 aliens, Titanosaurus is reduced to a tool of conquest. Those obnoxious roars that everyone seems to hate aren't supposed to be scary or triumphant like Godzilla's. They're panicked, they're mournful, they're unsure. Her attacks aren't really calculated, like Mechagodzilla's laser barrage. Instead, she just flails around and swipes and kicks and screams like something that doesn't fully understand what it's even doing. It's the same look that Katsura has during moments where she watches the carnage and can't do anything to stop it. The same forced performance of violence orchestrated by the men in control. This archetype, the peaceful figure turned destructive by coercion, runs deep in myth and cinema. One of the strongest precedents comes from Greek mythology. Talos, the giant bronze automaton who appears in Jason and the Argonauts. In that film, Talos is a towering mechanical guardian built to protect Crate, not out of cruelty, but duty. He doesn't attack the Argonauts out of hatred, he does it because he's programmed to. And when his life vein is disabled, he topples over and dies, not like a villain defeated, but like a machine that's been released. Like Titanosaurus, Talos is an artificial extension of someone else's will, a figure of immense power with no say in how it's used. The tragedy is not in their defeat, but in the fact that they were never allowed to be anything more than weapons. You can see similar echoes in King Kong, where the titular ape is captured and dragged into a society that only sees him as a spectacle. Kong's rampage in New York isn't on purpose, it's entirely confused and reactionary. It's born out of trauma and captivity. He's punished not for being violent, but for being placed in a world that never made room for his kind. Any destruction is entirely incidental. That's the mold that Titanosaurus fits right into. She didn't rise from the ocean to conquer. She was called, controlled, and used. Her final fate, retreating into the sea after Mechagodzilla is destroyed, feels less like a defeat and more like an escape from potential death. The battle is over and the leash is broken. This theme has carried forward in the kaiju genre even to present day. In Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, the character of Shimo follows this exact lineage, a frost-breathing titan forced into battle by the villainous Scar King. Shimo was framed not as an antagonist, but as a tragic figure, a beast shackled to a cause she didn't choose. Like Titanosaurus, she's a creature of incredible power, but no agency. And like Titanosaurus, her redemption doesn't come through battle, but through release. These monsters aren't villains. They're metaphors for anyone forced into violence by a world that doesn't value peace. Terror of Mechagodzilla understood that, and Titanosaurus, in all her misunderstood fury, is its most haunting reminder. Meanwhile, the battle between Godzilla and Mechagodzilla is symbolic of the tension between organic life and technological control. This is a conflict where each creature's nature is very sharply defined. Godzilla, as per usual, is a force of nature, representing instinct, autonomy, and raw survival. Mechagodzilla is a mechanical imitation of Godzilla, who symbolizes dehumanized power devoid of personal will. This theme was present in the prior film, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, but I think it's even further explored here. Godzilla's role in the film stands apart from the other characters, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that, 1, it's Godzilla, and 2, he is the only one with a clear sense of autonomy. He doesn't need external manipulation, control, or programming. His appearance in the film isn't out of necessity, but actually out of will. He chooses to rise from the ocean and defend humanity. This choice, even if instinctive, marks him as the only character who really acts with full agency. His motivations aren't dictated by outside forces. Godzilla simply acts as an elemental being who reacts to threats on its own terms. In contrast, Mechagodzilla is entirely controlled. It's an alien-made weapon with no autonomy. Its movements, its attacks, and even its existence are all the result of programming. If it wasn't clear already, I absolutely love Terror of Mechagodzilla. It is so thematically rich. Honestly, I think it might be the most thematically rich film in the entire franchise. Yes, more so than the original 54 film, more so than Shin Godzilla, and even Godzilla Minus One. Beyond the themes being super compelling on paper, they were executed perfectly. Movies with a ton of heavy themes tend to struggle with being too preachy or jam-packed with an overstuffed message. However, when you have Ishirō Honda in the director's chair, you're working with someone who can balance entertainment with extremely deep themes. He did it with the first Godzilla movie and how that film was a commentary on nuclear devastation. He did it with King Kong vs. Godzilla and the commentary on the slop being created by companies for broadcast on television in Japan. And he did it with his last Godzilla movie, Terror of Mechagodzilla, but a lot of that has to do with the late Yukiko Takayama just being an incredible screenwriter. While she did end up working in the Japanese TV industry for nearly 2 decades, I really wish we could have seen more Yukiko Takayama screenplays being directed for the screen by Ishirō Honda. Not even Godzilla ones, just normal movies. I would have loved to have seen that. It's a damn shame she didn't work on any more movies after this beyond 2011's The Tale of Genji, A Thousand Year Enigma. Like a lot of Godzilla flicks from this era, Terror of Mechagodzilla was released internationally under a million different titles and edits. In the United Kingdom in 1978, it was retitled to Monsters from an Unknown Planet. In the US, it was released by Bobcon Enterprises under the baffling and almost nonsensical title, The Terror of Godzilla. The English dub was heavily cut down, and the violent scenes and the brief moment of Katsura's nudity were removed in order to secure a PG rating for the film. Toho also assembled an international version by dubbing Terror of Mechagodzilla into English for foreign markets, which did not see major theatrical use in the US, but was issued on American VHS in the early 1990s. Other markets saw dubbed releases as well. For example, the Japanese poster art was replaced in many countries, and some foreign prints placed voiceovers over exposition-heavy scenes. The cuts in the Western versions altered the tone, removing Katsura's death scene in a bizarre move, which robs the finale of its intended emotional impact. In all of my retrospectives, I love dedicating time to the various international versions of these films, since I grew up watching the English dubs, and they deserve to be mentioned as well. Love them or hate them, they deserve to be mentioned alongside the movies, because it's part of the viewing experience, especially for someone in America like myself. Now, the specific DVD copy that I grew up watching to death was the classic media release of the film. It was at my local library, and so I was the only person that ever really checked it out, and I loved it. Now, this DVD features both the original Japanese version with subtitles and the extended English dub. There's an added prologue that goes over the history of Godzilla, and I loved it as a kid.
Nobody knows the origin of this indestructible monster, but many people believe Godzilla was some kind of an ancient god.
For the longest time, I just assumed that this prologue was in every version of the movie, with stock footage from Godzilla's revenge being used quite liberally.
Attempts were made to destroy Godzilla with modern war machines.
Honestly, I wish that prologue was in every cut of the movie. It makes Terror of Mechagodzilla feel like a definitive end to the Showa era.
Godzilla the terrifying monster now becomes Godzilla the friend and ally.
However, the original Japanese version still has a very effective opening that sums up the prior film in a very comprehensive way. So much so that it almost makes watching Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla entirely unnecessary. Almost unnecessary. I still stand by my opinion that that movie is great, even if Terror of Mechagodzilla does everything that movie does, but better. This film stands out as a near masterpiece. A movie that takes the formula established in earlier entries and pushes it further with higher stakes, richer character drama, and some of the best and most impressive special effects work of its time. While its predecessor, 1974's Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, is often praised for introducing Mechagodzilla and delivering a crowd-pleasing spectacle, Terror builds on that foundation with a far more emotionally charged and dramatically cohesive story. There's a weight to this sequel that the previous film just didn't quite reach. I love how big the stakes are in this movie. In the prior installment, it was Godzilla and King Caesar against Mechagodzilla, and they could barely defeat Mechagodzilla. In this film, Godzilla's on his own, and Mechagodzilla is upgraded with another monster to help him. One of the standout moments, and arguably one of the greatest entrances Godzilla ever gets, is his arrival through smoke and shadow, lit only by flashes of light as the Godzilla theme begins to swell. It's theatrical without being melodramatic, and it reinforces the idea of Godzilla as a mythic force rather than just another monster. Another great scene is where Mechagodzilla's head gets torn off, and you think that's the end of the movie, but then, in a twist, Mechagodzilla keeps fighting, and he has a turret for a head now. It is so fun. I love it. I really do. But not every creative choice here lands. The Black Hole Planet 3 aliens are considerably less memorable than in their earlier appearance. In the previous films, when they died, they'd transform into gorillas. It was surreal and horrifying, but here they're just in these dull silver jumpsuits for the whole movie. We never get to see them transform into gorillas, which is just super disappointing. Yes, they serve their function in the story, but their personality has just been diluted down to another boring alien invader akin to the Kilax from Destroy All Monsters. Terror of Mechagodzilla was dismissed by critics at the time of its release, likely due to kaiju fatigue and a misunderstanding of what the film was trying to do. It doesn't present itself with the bright, bombastic energy of earlier Godzilla films, but that's exactly what makes it just so effective. It slows down, it leans into tragedy, and it lingers on character. It gives you something to feel. There's real craftsmanship here, not just in the suits and the sets, but in the emotional architecture of the story. For all these reasons, it deserves to be remembered not as a footnote in the series, but as one of its high points. It's also a fantastic ending to the Showa era. And with all that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick. You're watching Firewood Media. This is just one small part of my massive Godzilla retrospective project. The Showa era is completed. The goal in this series is to revisit and review every single Godzilla movie and TV show. Yes, even the super obscure ones like Godzilla Island. We're going to talk about everything. I've already gone over the majority of the MonsterVerse, and now the Showa era is finished. I've covered it all. Up next, I'll be focusing more of my efforts on the Showa Gamera run, as well as Ultra Q and Ultra Man. Those are going to take a little bit longer to make because they are TV shows, the latter two at least. So that's going to take a bit, but expect to see some Gamera retrospectives on the channel soon. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Big thank you to our channel members. Their names are listed right here. Big shout out to them for supporting the channel, making videos just like these possible. Again, I'm Cole McCormick. This is Firewood Media. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.